Ladies and gents, and welcome to CG Reaction. This is Exploring the SCP Foundation, SCP-001, by the channel The Exploring Series. This is the first ever SCP. So this is going to be awesome to react to, awesome to watch. What's going to be first ever SCP case? I mean, obviously SCP-001 has to be the first ever case. Anomalies don't come with their numbers, SCP assigns them. And obviously SCP would assign first ever case SCP-001. So what's this going to be? Will this explain the origin of SCP, how it came to be? Or is this going to be, explain the origin of how anomalies started? Who knows how it's going to be? I love SCP because SCP is really detailed. It's not just some stupid explanation. It's really detailed and, deep lore. Whenever I see a story, sometimes I came upon some SCP case and I'm like, this is simple, but along the line I start to realize, wait a minute, there's deep meaning to this. So far all the SCP videos I've seen, I've reacted to, has just been awesome. I haven't come across a single bad one. There are so many of them. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some bad one, but I haven't seen them yet. So far I'm loving it. This is basically SCP, how the people around the world basically puts the story on the internet, like this is an SCP, and they connect it to the entire world of SCP, which is just awesome. It's ridiculous to think that how many people can just create an awesome story and link it together like that to create a massive world. I just love it. So yeah, let's watch this one. And I've reacted to quite a few SCP videos already. If you haven't seen my reaction to it, check out the playlist I've created. There's in the end card. Check out the link in the description, which has all of my videos that I reacted to. And yeah, if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so I know which type of videos to react to more. Yeah, let's watch this one.
SCP-001. The SCP Foundation contains thousands of anomalous creatures, objects, and phenomena, and this list of SCPs of course starts with number 1. Newcomers to the site will be perhaps surprised to find that there is no single SCP-001, but instead there are currently over 24 proposals.
I don't understand this. Alright, let's get out of the SCP world and get to the real world. The people who started this SCP thing are writing the stories. The person who came up with this SCP thing, wouldn't he be the first one to create a story about SCP? And wouldn't that be SCP-001? How did all these things started? Did they just create some stories, and in the middle of it, after creating lots of stories, they realized, let's call it SCP and band it all together into the one lore? Is that what happened? So they don't have SCP-001? Because how could there be so many SCPs? Or this is how it was intended from the start? That somebody's like, you know what, we're gonna make the SCP-001 many or something like that.
Outlined for the slot. The reason for this structure within the universe is so that no one outside of the O5 Council know which of the proposals is the true SCP-001 for the sake of security.
Damn.
The reason for this out of the universe is because having the 001 slot was considered special, and it was reserved for something worthy of the slot. The proposals were then first.
Oh, that is so awesome. So from the start, people start to wrote these stories. They are like, you know what, let's keep SCP-001 aside. When something really good story comes, we're gonna assign that to that. Until then, SCP-001 is empty. So they had, they knew that this SCP thing is going to be big. They're going to create stories and it's going to be big. So they planned for it. This is awesome.
Submitted hoping to earn the spot. But at this point, it's likely that no single proposal will ever be chosen. While a number of the 001 proposals are related to the concept of the fictional starting of the Foundation, just as many of them have nothing to do with the early Foundation. There are far more proposals than I'd like to fit in one video, and likely many more to come, so this video will go over a number of the most popular proposals. The highest rated proposal was submitted by Dr. Clef, titled The Gate Guardian. This proposal describes a massive humanoid entity, over 1,000 feet in height, that stands motionless at a location near the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This entity is standing in front of a tremendous gate, through which a pastoral grove can be seen, which include 2 immense fruit trees.
Okay.
The entity is seen with its head bowed, holding a large sword or knife, and with a number of bright wings emerging from its back. Any entity, living or otherwise, that comes within 1 kilometer of SCP-001 is attacked and obliterated instantly. Additionally, any hostile action taken against SCP-001 from any distance results in the destruction of the attacker. However, those that directly observe the entity from a safe distance are given a telepathic order that they are compelled to obey.
That's creepy.
The most common of these is forget, causing the observer to walk away and forget their.
Well, I'm imagining this in real world. I mean, obviously it would not work. No, it would work. He just said it. So obviously I was thinking then real world would not work because if this entity is at a fixed location, obviously drones and people can find it. But like he said in the last, anybody sees the entity, he just gives the command, the forget. So that makes sense, so people don't know it. But this is so creepy. Imagine looking this massive creature in the distance. Look at the wings. I mean, who would have thought of this creature? Like, let's give multiple wings. And it does look, really creepy. And, there are fruit trees behind it. Is this related to Garden of Eden or something from the Bible? Because I'm pretty sure there is an SCP called God too. So, I love this SCP lore. What it does is take all the myths around the world, all the religion things around the world, and band it together into this one fictional world. I love that. So apparently Bible, gods, even angels are part of SCP anomalies. It's a case. So this could be something like Archangel or something. Who knows? They're guarding something. 1,000 feet tall. That's scary, man.
Experience. Notably, the founder of the Foundation was given the directive, prepare, leading him to start the SCP Foundation.
Whoa. Whoa, I love this. So this thing gave the order to the creator of SCP Foundation, and that's why he created the SCP Foundation. I mean, in a way that makes sense, since this is apparently angel look, since it's lighting up like that, it could be angelic. So, archangel or something, some kind of a guardian of things, and knowing how angels are, obviously they want to guard things, and this thing cannot guard entire world since it's protecting just one particular area. But this thing probably found some worthy person who could create an organization that could protect the world in its behalf, I guess. Because in a way, this thing started SCP by ordering some other person. So that kind of makes sense. This is good origin one.
Foundation has done some minor testing with the entity, but nothing so far has passed the 1 kilometer barrier. SCP-073 and 076, known as Cain and Abel, both refused to go near the entity, although Cain was ordered to approach, causing some expunged effect and the termination of any further experimentation.
Whoa, that's grim.
Finally, the proposal ends with a transmission that the Foundation received, time-stamped a number of years in the future, discussing SCP-001 leaving its location and an imminent apocalyptic scenario.
Oh.
The entity currently has no containment procedures, although it is constantly monitored.
Wait a minute. So that thing could be an entity, angelic entity, who holds this world together or something by guarding that particular place. If the entity moves, entire world come to blows or something, apocalypse. And that could make sense that that thing gives the order to some guy to create a foundation to protect the world. I mean, this is really biblical and that kind of thing, but it could be good origin story.
S. Andrew Swan's proposal, titled The Database,
Look at this,
showcases a simple and yet meta answer for the existence of the Foundation and all of the SCPs. In a nutshell, this proposal outlines the concept that the SCP Foundation attempted to look into a grand unifying theory that connects all of the SCPs in their universe to a single origin. In the process, they discovered that their records would often change on a whim, but also that their reality was changing along with it.
Oh no.
The reason for this, and the reason why they halted all investigation into the origin theory and expunged practically all of the data, is that they discovered their universe is subject to the omnipotent wills of a group of horror writers.
Oh god.
To put it plainly, this proposal says that the Foundation discovered that their reality is constantly subject to change based on what the authors of the SCP website decide to write.
Oh no.
To combat this,
So whoever wrote this one, he literally, put the reality of all this, that people writing the stories of SCP and put it on the internet and made it part of the universe. I mean, that's too, I don't know, feels too much. I mean, being that origin stories doesn't, it's a bit too much to me, I think. The Guardian one, makes sense. This is, attaching a real world to the fictional world a bit too much. This is still fun to think about, but I like the Guardian one better. But this was epic though.
the O5 Council have prepared a series of memetic agents that would affect viewers of the SCP database, leading to unconsciousness or death. This proposal is one of the more controversial ones due to the extreme meta nature, but it does neatly answer the question of where all the anomalous objects come from.
Yeah, meta, that's the word I was looking for. It's too meta.
SD Locke's proposal takes on a unique format, titled When Day Breaks, alternating between the standard technical writing typical of an SCP entry and a somewhat more traditional storytelling format. The writing is in the second person, starting with detailing how you followed a distress signal into an abandoned Foundation facility while being hunted by some sort of monster. You barricade yourself in a room with a computer terminal and turn it on. Here we are presented with a proper description of SCP-001, which is now the designation that the Foundation assigned to the Sun after an inexplicable event. This event caused light rays from the Sun to melt any living organism, including plants, animals, and humans, into a still-living congealed mass of flesh.
Okay.
Plants can still photosynthesize, animals remain sentient, and humans retain some sapience and memory. But when touching, these masses can combine and blend together into large bulk organisms that drag themselves around.
Oh, that's creepy.
Additionally, any anomalous organism loses their anomalous properties when affected by the Sun. An estimated 6.8 billion casualties occurred within 24 hours of this event, leaving the Earth an apocalyptic wasteland.
Damn.
It's implied that eventually all life on Earth will be a part of a single mass of gelatinous flesh, as those affected seem to desire to bring everything else into the Sun's light.
Okay, so this is basically the end of the world, SCP. But that would mean that this is the last ever thing. This is not really origin, this is the ending. How does that work though? It's an SCP-001. How could that be the first ever case file?
The rest of the proposal goes over some earlier logs of some Foundation personnel attempting to survive the apocalypse, and eventually the reader, you, are dragged out of the facility by the mass and taken into the light. Dr. Mann's proposal...
Wait a minute, is it that, that this happened long ago and mass extinction happened and then world restarted? In that sense it's an SCP-001, because that would make sense.
The spiral path is incredibly simple on the surface, merely a circular path in a forest that seems to be continuously uphill when walked in a counterclockwise direction. A fence, some armed guards, and a nearby laboratory make up the basic containment procedures, but an attached document available to new members of the secretive O5 Council provides the full story. The document tells the tale of a physicist named Aaron Siegel, who discovered the anomalous gravel path in 1891. Rather than ignoring it and moving on, Aaron decided to study it, finding it to be basically a glitch in our world. From his experiments, he was able to derive new equations, and he began to create inventions based on these new principles, the first of which was a key that could open any lock, SCP-005. He brought in other bright minds to study the path with him, creating the basis for the Foundation, but rather than containing the anomalies, they hoped to use them to better the world. One discovery flowed into the next, and although they started small, they began experimenting with humans and creating more elaborate anomalies.
So this is the first anomaly they detected, this path. Some people started to, experiment with this. They came up with the new scientific principles that created more out of this world discoveries like keys and things like that, which is the SCP anomalies apparently. And by studying this path, all these SCP anomalies were created. Is that what the story behind this is? That this would be the literal origin of all SCP anomalies.
Mistakes were also made, with inadvertent creations also coming out of this period, but they kept moving forward, gaining funding from governments and militaries around the world.
That makes sense, that last bit there, that mistakes were made. Otherwise, it's just that they created all these anomalies, because some anomalies are just plain out just destructive, obviously. So why would somebody could deliberately create something that's so destructive? And so SCP is so widespread that some anomalies are kind of opposite to some other anomalies, so that doesn't make sense with the goal. But the way he said it, some mistakes were made, that kind of fills the gap.
As the Foundation grew, the original group of researchers continued to create new anomalies, but created the masquerade of having other people find their creations. Certain individuals from the group split off, forming groups such as the Church of the Broken God, but the O5s continue to create new anomalies to better understand what they've done. The document leaves off by stating that they didn't create every SCP held by the Foundation. Some just appeared in containment, and were always in containment. Like many 001 proposals, this one either fits with your headcanon of the Foundation, or it doesn't.
I mean, I like that last part, that some anomalies were just created inside the containment. They were always in containment. That kind of, helps with the certain times I think that something is so dangerous. How the hell did SCP capture that anomaly and put inside the containment? It would make sense that they were always in containment. SCP didn't put them inside there.
Jonathan Ball's proposal, Sheaf of Papers, is another simple one that attempts to explain where all of the SCPs come from. The Sheaf of Papers is literally that, a small stack of papers with confidential report on special items, classified, written on the cover page. When the cover page is turned over, a new SCP is described, and sometime after reading the report, the SCP described will be discovered somewhere. The first SCP described was SCP-002, followed by 003, and so on.
So in that sense, this is SCP-001, and it creates by will all the other SCPs.
It's unclear whether or not the Sheaf of Papers is responsible for creating the SCPs in question, or merely notifying the reader and the discoverer of their existence.
Alright, no, wait a minute. It implies that as soon as you turn the page, new SCP, comes on and somebody discovered it immediately at that moment. Which means it creates its own will, not notifying somebody. Because if anomalies existed, why somebody just finds it exact moment where you turn a page and it comes on? Why is there no SCP that somebody already discovered without somebody even reading the page? And if nobody read this and turned the pages, would those SCP still be there? I mean, to me it makes sense that this creates it by will.
Rather than concerning itself with the start of the Foundation, Jorik and Dematic's proposal, 36, more relates to the end of the Foundation.
Like there's something.
36 describes 36 individuals of varying ages, genders, and ethnicities. When any anomalous item or phenomena is brought within close proximity of one of these individuals, the anomalous quality is nullified. When multiple members of the 36 are brought together, the range and intensity of this nullifying field is increased. Additionally, when any of the 36 die, multiple anomalous events will occur, along with the sudden appearance of varying dangerous entities. Examples include sudden rainfall containing numerous fatal pathogens, massive walking creatures, and spontaneous ritualistic cannibalism in a widespread area.
Damn, these 36 are literally the pillars which holds the world together. If they start to fall, all the dangerous anomalies come into play. And if probably all of them dies, the world goes extinct or something, destroys. This is good too in a way. This 36 holds the fabric of the world together, otherwise the entire world would rip apart or something.
Yeah. Civilian casualties after each of these events are generally tremendous, reaching into the tens or hundreds of thousands. After the death of one of the 36, they are supposedly reincarnated as newborn babies, although the Foundation has yet to prove this. It's believed that once...
So they have the same power of nullifying effect, or one of them are dead, anomalies released, and even though they get reborn, they're just normal person. Or do they, do they still have the nullifying effect?
All 36 individuals are brought together, their nullifying field will reach across the cosmos, removing all anomalous properties from existence and making the world young again.
Damn.
There are, of course, many other proposals for the SCP-001 slot. Dr. Gear's prototype proposal is simply a dangerous, anomalous humanoid, and is presented as the very first SCP that the Foundation decided to report on. Kate McTirris's proposal, a record, relates a researcher's discovery.
I don't like that dangerous thing. I mean, there are lots of dangerous things like the Shy Guy, that alligator thing. But first ever SCP, it would make sense to me that it has something to do with the origin of SCP. Because SCP Foundation was founded because people who founded the SCP saw that world needs a foundation called SCP Foundation. The only reason they would see that if they saw something that requires this foundation, so that would in a way explain the origin of SCP-2. It's just simply being just a creature that is dangerous. I mean, no, it must explain somehow how SCP came to be, the foundation.
Discovery that anything written in the SCP-001 slot becomes true, and she apparently uses this ability to become God. The Broken God proposal from Twisted Gears and Cactus goes over an incident in Mexico in 1942, when members of the Church of the Broken God attempted to rebuild their god with a false heart, leading to disastrous results. Bright's factory proposal is a story of a grim and deeply mysterious factory.
What is Church of the Broken God? It sounds like they are the people who founded the SCP Foundation but went the other way, like he said in one of the cases. What is that?
Continually creates new SCPs for unknown reasons. As mentioned, some of these certainly deal with explaining the origins of the Foundation, or of SCPs in general, and many others are just immensely powerful or notable SCPs. There's no real guidelines for what constitutes a 001 proposal, and sometimes certain SCPs end up as 001 proposals even though the author originally wrote it for some other purpose. The actual first SCP written was 173, posted on the Paranormal board of 4chan, and is currently the highest rated article on the SCP Wiki.
That thing, right? That weird thing that stays stationary, but when you don't look at it, it comes and snaps your neck or something. That's why people like that SCP, since it's the first ever somebody wrote it. It's popular, I guess.
The SCP-001 slot is indicative of the SCP universe as a whole, as so many of them contradict with one another, forcing readers to pick and choose what fits their personal headcanon. I'd encourage you to read a number of them yourself to decide which one suits you, but only the O5 Council know which of them is the truth.
Really, there is a god and a bunch of horror writers. Okay. Is there something else or that's it? Yeah, that's it, I think. Yep. So yeah, I like the Guardian one, to be brutally honest, because it has that 1,000 feet tall, that glowing light kind of thing, like it's an entity. It's very biblical. It's like a archangel or some kind of a guardian who told the somebody to create an SCP Foundation so that thing can protect the world from all the anomalies, because it can, since it's guarding something. And in the end, it says that if that thing moves away, that signifies that apocalypse is coming. So basically, that thing is holding the world together. If that thing moves, the world falls apart, something like that, because that feels really, like I said, biblical and angelic. So if that's the first ever SCP, that makes sense. The writer one is pretty meta. It's the actual what it is, and they fit it together in the SCP world. That's good too. But I like the Guardian one. The Apocalypse ones are good too. The Sun one, that turns every matter into one, combining every matter of the world to one thing. So that kind of works. That Pathway one is in a weird way, but that's also kind of origin story, so I like that too. Is good. Some of them stories about just being a creature that is powerful, that's kind of weak. I like it to be more origin story. So yeah, Apocalypse ones doesn't make sense to me, since it's apocalypse event. If it's about apocalypse, that event that happened way long ago and cycle repeated, and new creatures came and we are another creatures like that makes sense. It's an origin story. But it's about the future, about the apocalypse, SCP-001, that doesn't make sense to me. I like the Guardian one better. This was a good, man. This was really good. I like how people think. I like how they create stories. This was awesome, and I hope there are more in detail videos about this particular SCPs, like the Guardian one, and of that pathway that just turn uphill the left side. All these things, the sun thing, there are more detailed videos of it, because I like to see them. This is really deep. I love it. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want me to react to some other videos, other SCP or anything, comment down. Check out other SCP videos I reacted to. There's a playlist I created for SCP. Check out the card, check out the end cards. Check out the link in the description with all of my other videos that I reacted to. And like, subscribe, support this channel, and I'll see you next time.